Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Don Gates, an alcoholic. Quite inspiring, Heather. If I'd have known you were that sick, I'd have married you myself. I actually asked her age earlier, not because I think she was too young to be here. It was simply that we had dinner with a group there tonight, and I heard her saying to somebody, "What is that old goat possibly going to say to help a swinger like me?" You know, she said a fast bicycle ride and a love affair would kill him. Which isn't true. I go pretty good on a bicycle. But it is true. I gave my first AA talk in 1955, 20 years before she was born. I have no particular, my wife Tonya, a couple of people came here specifically to hear her, for, people, escapees from Atascadero. There is no hiding place. But she does give a great talk. And I'm sorry she isn't here because the program is one of attraction rather than promotion. And she is an attractive example of AA. I first ran into, she had celebrated her 36th birthday the other day. Actually, she came in as a fetus. Her mother was the alcoholic. But I met her, I saw her for the first time 35 years ago, I guess it would have been, at a meeting in Pasadena. And I was telling someone about that. She was seated in the front row, and I was speaking, and those were the days of the miniskirts. And I had a view of AA I had never had before. I suggested she stick around. I might be able to use her later. And actually, 24 years ago, we did become man and wife, and it's been a very good period. I don't go in for telling much about what I used to be like in the biographical sense. I've seen speakers get up here and they talk about their childhood and their war experiences, et cetera, et cetera. I don't do that because it has absolutely nothing to do with my alcoholism. Alcoholism is a physical condition like diabetes. I've heard people say, my parents were alcoholic and my dad was an alcoholic. I said I'm never going to be one of those. Would you say if your father was a diabetic? I'm never going to be like that. I'm not going to be a diabetic. I'm going to take a couple of candy bars but not go into a coma. So I don't talk too much about my upbringing. It was very normal. I mean, my mother was a Pentecost, and my father was a communist. And I, I do remember one aspect of it. I remember one time we were riding down the road out in the countryside in a Model T Ford, in all probability, and we came upon a rabbit that had been hit by a preceding car. And there was this little bundle of fluff and blood on the highway, and my mother, being sentimental, looked at it and said, "Oh, Donald, see the poor bunny rabbit dead on the road." And I looked and saw, and perhaps even a tear began to form in the corner of my eye, because my father, not wanting me to be manifesting a sign of weakness, said, "All right, Donald, sing along with me. See the dead rabbit, clap hands, see the dead rabbit, clap hands." And so I clapped and cried for a few miles, which has absolutely nothing to do with my alcoholism. But it may help to explain why I don't always know how to respond to given stimuli. I used to do a great deal of speaking, of course, and we don't do it since I retired 7 years ago when we moved up the coast. We don't do very much of it now. But when I used to speak, one of the problems with doing a lot of speaking, apart from the fact there is terrible royalties in the taping, haven't got a penny yet. It's an amazing thing. But wherever you go, people will have heard your story, and you will finally be in Jamestown, North Dakota, and think you have a virgin audience, and somebody will rush up and say, "Make sure you tell a story," and it is never. They never asked for those glittering jewels of insight, how you put together in a string so that people can build a life upon them. They come up and ask you to tell a story where you made an utter boob of yourself, a damn fool of yourself, and that's all they remember. I'm sure Moses had the same problem. Wherever he went, people said, "Tell about the burning bush, Moses." Well, I have the same kind of a problem. And it was asked tonight, a couple of people, well, they said they wouldn't pay the gas money if I didn't tell it, but the story I will tell, you probably have heard before, but if you've ever heard any of my monologues, but I should probably preface it by saying, until this particular incident, which was something of a breakthrough, I had always been able to explain the problems I got into with society. Because to have a conflict with society, there has to be some other member of society involved. And you can always blame him to some extent. If he hadn't made a left turn, I wouldn't have hit him. Which is true, but if I hadn't been an unguided missile coming down the street, I might have noticed his turn a little earlier, and that sort of thing. But this particular occasion was an exception. I should also preface it by saying I drank almost exclusively to relax. And on this occasion, I'd been relaxed about a week. And I awoken from a fitful, nightmarish dream. I was asleep and I had a dream of Dante's Inferno. They're imps of the perverse. I could smell the sulfur. I staggered to my feet and I thought, what's wrong? It even fleetingly occurred to me that alcohol might play some role in this. Because I was drenched in perspiration. But then I realized such wasn't the case, because I noticed that I had passed out, I had nodded off on the couch in the front room. My wife and children having gone where they used to go at night. I don't know where it was, but I had nodded off on the couch. And I could tell because there was a thin spire of smoke emanating from the couch. And so I knew what had happened. I had had a cigarette in my hand or mouth, and it had fallen upon the covering of this couch, burnt through into the matting, into the tacking, where lacking sufficient oxygen to take flame, the embers had simply spread over the course of the night. And so I saw there was nothing wrong with my drinking. I'd just been barbecued. So commending myself on my perspicacity, I went into the kitchen, got a big pitcher of water, came back and tried to pour it into that tiny little hole. Produced a rather spectacular cascade on the carpet, but beyond that, nothing. So I saw that more dramatic measures were demanded. I went again into the kitchen, returned with a butcher knife, slashed the couch open from one end to the other, peeled it back, exposing the coals, and then was able to subdue them with the cooling balm of the water. The only thing was it produced acrid black smoke. This has been 60 years ago, more than half a century, more than a quarter of this nation's history. And I can still remember standing there, looking down at that slashed and sodden mess, and knowing almost to a certainty my wife was going to notice it. She was a very keen-eyed woman. There was little that passed her ken around that house, I want you to know. And though she was a good woman, obviously no Al-Anon yet involved, but she was a good woman and would never say anything intentionally to emasculate the head of the household. But there were times in moments of stress when she would say things to me that were unkind, cruel even. She might say, "You drunken son of a bitch, you did it again, didn't you?" And then she would suffer horrible remorse when she calmed down for having spoken in such a fashion to the breadwinner. And I wanted to spare her this. But I didn't know what to do. But for every problem, no matter how complex or demanding, there is one simple answer, which is wrong. But it occurred to me, obvious, get the couch out of the house. I mean, she might vaguely remember there'd been something on that side of the room, but out of sight, out of mind. The only thing is, it isn't easy to move a bed couch when you should be checking into a hospital. But with that Herculean strength that comes only to the youthful and panic-stricken alcoholic, I somehow managed to heft that brute onto my back and lurched out the front door. At that time, we were living on the second floor of an apartment building that had a very small porch with columns on it. I virtually beat myself to death trying to make the turn, caroming off the post, bong, bong, bong. But eventually I did descend into the patio, and then I discovered that, like Bobby Burns's mouse, foresight had not been my long suit. There is virtually no place to conceal a couch in a typical apartment patio. So I'm standing there, my legs are trembling. I should be in a sanitarium, but I'm moving furniture. And I remembered a creek about 5 miles away. So I lumbered to my car and I hefted that monster on top of it and got in to drive to my selected place of repose. Now, all I have ever wanted in life was dignity. I have not cavilled at disaster when I could face it with dignity. But now, as I was driving down the street, I don't know what time it was, but it was daylight now, and there were people at the bus stops, with lunch pails and briefcases. I have no idea they stay up that late, but try it sometime. And as I drove down the street, I became aware that all of their heads turned and followed my progress. Eyes wide, jaws agape. I thought, by golly, it doesn't take much to draw a crowd in California, I'll say that. Until I passed an auto dealership that had a dusty window that acted like a mirror and I got a view of what they were looking at. Here comes a guy down the street, nattily attired in a bathrobe, and on top of his car rests a couch, which previously had lacked oxygen enough to take flame. But going down the street, the wind was going through it like a billows, and the flames were 30, 40 feet in the air. Now, when I returned, I could not think of a single way to blame my sleeping wife and children for having imperiled their lives as they obviously had. And so it did indeed occur to me that perhaps drinking was beginning to pose problems. But that's enough of that. Suffice it to say, subsequently, I was to move beyond social drinking. In fact, I wasn't even getting in any trouble at the end of my drinking. I mean, how much trouble can get into in a hotel room with a bottle of wine and a copy of Playboy? If the maid doesn't step on you, you're reasonably safe. The only thing is you're dying in there. You know, and yet, oddly enough, that story doesn't really tell what I was like. I'm almost sorry I resorted to it again, except for popular demand, a humiliating story. Something reminded me of it earlier, that a thing that tells more about what I used to be like. I was in college and taking a course in oral interpretation of literature or something like that. And we were instructed to make a recording of something that we thought was worthwhile, and that we would then make another one at the end of the semester, and we could compare the two to see if we'd learned anything or progressed at all. And so I'm going to make this recording, and I had the entire field of English literature, poetry, prose, to choose from. And I realized it was going to be a significant event. I assumed it would probably be in a time capsule somewhere, along with Laurence Olivier's Hamlet. And of all of the things in the English language that I might have chosen as memorable, I picked out the epilogue to The Shropshire Lad, which, if you haven't read it or forgotten it, The Shropshire Lad is a series of poems, sad poems about youth dying young and so on. And at the end of it, the author is supposed to be a fellow named Terence, and his friends chide him for his gloomy verse. You know, and they say, "Come, pipe a tune to dance to, lad." And Terence replies, "Well, if 'tis dancing you would be, there's brisker pipes than poetry. And malt does more than Milton can to justify God's ways to man. Ale, man, ale's the stuff to drink for fellows whom it hurts to think. Look into the pewter pot to see the world as the world is not. And oh, 'tis wondrous till 'tis past. The mischief is it will not last. And many's the time I've been to Ludlow Fair and left my necktie God knows where, and carried halfway home or near pints and quarts of Ludlow beer. Oh, then the world was none so bad, and I myself a sterling lad, and down in lovely muck I've lain, happy till I woke again. And then I saw the morning sky. Hi-ho, the tale was all a lie. The world, it was the old world yet. I was I, my things were wet. And nothing now remained to do but begin the game anew. Therefore, while in this world there's still much good, but much less good than ill. And while the sun and moon endure, luck's a chance, but trouble's sure. I'd face it as a wise man would, and train for ill and not for good. Can you imagine picking that out and remembering it 60 years later? Oh, God. Strike that, Mr. Tape Man. But that actually tells more about me than the mere fact, that some dumb things happen to me. People get up and tell about the episodes and things they did while they were drinking under the guise of telling what they used to be like, as if they did it on purpose. I didn't do those things on purpose. They were just things that happened to me. By the way, anybody who may be listening to this tape, you don't know quite the scene here, so I'll describe it to you. It's a very large auditorium with perhaps 1,000 people. Many in formal dress. But behind me, behind the lectern here, there is a large screen on which you can project pictures. And that reminds me, I don't know how many of you ever heard Earl Marsh speak, Dr. Earl Marsh, wonderful speaker. He was both a surgeon and a psychiatrist, and he's an AA member, and he gave a wonderful damn talk. But he used to do what they called the blackboard talk, where he would use a prop like this. What he'd do is draw a graph showing a straight line, and that was called normal drinking, assuming that was the way it was, at least until you took something to drink. But when you got to a certain point, you passed this line, and now you were called what he called, or medically it's called, toxic dependency drinking with slipping control. Who says there's no poetry in medicine? Toxic dependency drinking with slipping control. And at first, the first thing you may notice, for example, would be that maybe you find yourself out in the kitchen mixing drinks for the party, and you take a little shot for yourself, because you always want, a little extra, and somebody sees you do it. You didn't think anything about it, but they say, "Why are you doing that when you're having a drink?" And you suddenly feel guilty. So now you start sneaking drinks. Before you take an extra one, you take a little look around. All right, now, at that moment, you are down a very short distance down on the slope of toxic dependency drinking. And if somebody says, you're an alcoholic, you're going to say, that's nonsense. 99% of my drinking is still perfectly normal. And then maybe a little while later, you'll find yourself taking a drink in the morning. This is down maybe a year or two or so along the line. And it goes down like this. Well, little things begin to miss some time from work. But on each one of them, you can say, look how much of my drinking is normal. It's only when you get to the very bottom, which they call toxic dependency drinking with no control, that you would then be identifiable. Oh, actually, there is no such thing as toxic dependency drinking with no control, because you still have to hustle drinks. You have to get out and get a drink. But it's equivalent to it. And he used to give that talk. It was a great talk. One time he didn't show up at a convention where I was, so I gave his talk. I told him it was a great talk. I wouldn't want to do it all the time. But he just died recently, and he was a wonderful man. We're going to miss him. I don't know quite, having gotten out of the habit of speaking, I'm not quite certain exactly what all I should get into. I described a little bit about my drinking, so you won't think I'm here just to rise socially. And by the way, that's not just a jest. AA is an open sesame to advancement all over in almost every profession, and certainly in Hollywood. Good Lord, I mean, we swept the Emmys sometimes. Winning Oscars, for best actors, actresses, things like that. If you want to get ahead, you almost have to be an alcoholic member of AA. But my first introduction to AA, the one I said I started 55 years, or 1955, I had called, I was looking for, get back in my profession, and I had called this attorney's office and applied for work. And he said, okay, I will meet you tonight at Roxbury Park at 8:30. And I thought, that's a strange place to conduct a business meeting, Roxbury Park at 8:30. But I'd heard about Hollywood. And so I agreed, and I got there, and it was the Beverly Hills Men's Stag, an AA meeting that was held in the little rec hall there in Roxbury Park. And if you've never been there, it's a 5-minute point the finger, get up and give a 5-minute pitch meeting. And I was really impressed with these people. I wasn't in such bad shape, I mean, because it's held on a Wednesday. I'd been drunk all weekend, actually, but I'd tapered off pretty well on Monday. In fact, I think I had some chili on Tuesday. So I wasn't sitting on my hands by Wednesday. It was very quick, but I wasn't sitting on my hands. And so I was very impressed with these people. My gosh, they were obviously men of some substance. They were decent citizens, witty, some of them. I remember Chuck Chamberlain was there. He had a few years of sobriety, and Jack Bailey for Queen for a Day. And all of these people were remarkable people, witty, and I was just impressed as hell with them. And at the end of the meeting, as it was about to close, the leader looked around and he said, well, let's see, who will we get to close it? How about the young man sitting down here with the shiny black hair? That was your humble servant in 1955. Well, I said, I got up to close it because I'm a very fast study. I take on the hue of my environment, chameleon-like. You put me in jail and I see hard as the gig here, so I become a regular. Butt off, screw. Afraid somebody's going to put the arm on me, but now I've been in AA now for, hell, more than an hour, and I can see that humility is the gig in this organization. Now, I can out-humble any clown in the house when I put my mind to it. So I got up, I gave him a couple of minutes of humor, a couple of minutes of pathos, ended on a rising note of hope, and sat down as they swarmed about me to touch the hem of my garment. And one fellow said, you haven't spoken out at the Arroyo Seco recently, have you? Well, I just drunk my way down from San Francisco with a brief stop for some undergraduate work in Camarillo State Hospital. And so I had no idea what the hell the Arroyo Seco was, so I was reasonably certain I hadn't spoken there. And he said, I'm leading the meeting, whatever it was, next week. And he said, I wonder if you would come and be my main speaker. I said, certainly, always glad to help the poor devil crushed by the juggernaut demon rum. Now, if you can make two people laugh, you get 2 invitations for every pitch you make. So within 2 or 3 months, I was booked up. I was more popular in the San Gabriel Valley than Chuck C. Now, I hadn't taken the steps, hadn't talked to a sponsor. I was staying sober on the novelty of applause and a solid bowel movement. Why do people giggle at that? Those of you who are made of sterner stuff, I mean, he jests at scars who never felt a wound. If you had had the fever I did during the war, and every time I drank, that's what happened. I would rush into the John in the morning not knowing which end to point. But if you have had that problem, only if you have had that problem, can you imagine the sense of worth, the rise in self-esteem, verily even the sense of manly virility that comes the first time you're able to break wind without fear of following through? That alone should get you 1 birthday cake. The only thing is that grunting in the morning loses its sense of magnitude to you in time, and if you were doing nothing else, after a couple of years, I got bored and got taken drunk. And that happened to me persistently. I used to count my birthdays. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Couldn't get through that third year. And they would tell me, Don, what you got to do is get more into the inventory. And I would take out pen and paper and go up the stream of consciousness looking for character defects, and I'd still have trouble. And they'd say, well, you've got to work with a newcomer. And I'd drag them in off the bar stools, ready or not, alcoholic or not, and I'd still have trouble. And they'd say, well, you've got to get spiritual. And I would pursue God up and down the byways of the San Fernando Valley, and I'd still have trouble. And then almost 40 years ago, I decided to quit drinking. Haven't had any trouble since. Really, it's amazing how long you can stay sober if you don't drink. I was talking at the dinner table there about the people I have known in AA. If you've been around for almost 50 years, you're going to know almost everybody who is still alive. And unfortunately, many of them are no longer with us. And I was talking to them about how we don't change all that much in my experience in AA. You know, I've seen people in their talks say, I came into AA and boy, I just made a complete 360-degree turn. And I think, well, your geometry isn't very good, but by God, you're closer to the truth than you think. Because I don't see us changing all that much. Our basic traits, our basic character types are set by the time we're 5 or 6 years old. If we can just wrench ourselves 1 degree off course, just 1 lousy degree, and it's going to feel like we're giving up everything. We're just being torn asunder. But if you can get 1 degree off course and stay on it long enough, in a few years, you're going to be so far removed from where you would have been as to be unrecognizable by your friends or even you. And yet you haven't changed all that damn much. The good part is that those traits that you used to have, which were unfortunate for society and for you, will now be utilized for things that are good. Reminds me of the Tennessee Valley Authority. You know, before they built those dams and things back there, the rain used to pour into the mountains, come roaring down the rivulets into the big streams, flood out the area every damned summer, and they had no electricity, they had no power. It was a horrible, poverty-stricken area that was just subject to constant, unbridled floods. They went in with the Tennessee Valley Authority, and they built dams, and they built canals. And now, the water comes down, still hasn't changed, still lands in the mountains, still comes down the tributaries, comes into the streams. But now, by and large, it is used for a good purpose. They now have electricity back there. The people are prosperous. They've been educated. They go to school. Nothing has changed about that damn river. And yet, it now is a province for good instead of evil. And that is what I've seen in AA. Our founder, Bill Wilson, he was a hustler, a boomer, a stock market, a put together of deals. Everybody else who got sober in the Oxford movement, Frank Buckman's theories, they were happy to have it happen. They were glad about it. But none of them thought about making a deal out of it. Not Bill. He's going to write a book. Going to write a book, make $1 million. By God, he's going to really put this thing out there and he's going to get her going good. And he wrote the book. His character defect, if you want to call it that, was what brought us AA. Probably the greatest single man-made institution in the last couple centuries. And it happened only because of his character traits, which previously had been terrible defects. And Bill, by the way, as you know, was a manic depressive. Fortunately, he wrote the book in his manic phase. Subsequently, he was to go into an 8-year depression too, which was suicidal. He couldn't get out of bed, for God's sakes, for days at a time on the road of happy destiny when the promises had been fulfilled. But his traits were what brought it about. He hadn't really changed all that much, fortunately for us. We were talking about my friend Chuck Chamberlain. Chuck was without question the most spiritual fellow I have ever met in my life. There was no question, if you knew him and met him and heard him talk, that he believed what he said. And he helped more people. He was known, probably now, fame being so fleeting in AA, a lot of newcomers probably never heard of him, but he was known all over the world. And people are still reading his book and listening to his tapes and getting inspiration. And he was a great help to me. But he hadn't changed all that much. I knew the old-timers in Beverly Hills who knew him when he was drinking. And they said, we used to go into a bar and say, buy the house a drink. And then we'd see Chuck down at the end. We'd say, but not that damn preacher. I don't want to get him started. Chuck was always spiritual. But instead of being a nuisance, he became a source of incredible good. He was exceptional. I was telling him how he was really good for me because his simple, direct assertions saved my life. If he'd have been one who wanted to chop logic with me, I'd have cut him to shreds. But instead, I would tell him my problems, and he would look at me and say, Don, either God is or he isn't. I'd say, oh, thank you, Chuck, thank you. Thank you, I hadn't thought about it. Might be 2 or 3 years later, and I think, what the hell was that? God is or he isn't. I mean, talk about a pusillanimous platitude. Hell, I got degrees after my name. What the hell does that mean? But he was incredible, and there's no doubt that when you talk to him or listen to him that he meant what he said and he lived it that way. I told people, I might expose him a little bit as I did to poor Bill. But I used to tell Chuck the only reason he was able to be the spiritual leader that he was because he was married to that Saint Elsa. I don't know if there are any Al-Anons here who ever heard Elsa speak, but she was a saint. There was just no question about it. She not only packed his bags when he went out to spread the gospel, he ironed his shirt to make sure there was the right amount of starch in the collar. And I used to tell him, Chuck, if Elsa ever steps back, you're going to come crashing down like the statue of Ozymandias, you know. And I gave an example at the dinner table there. I got a notice sometime back, a long time back now, they were going to audit my income tax. Now, despite the high spiritual plateau on which I reside daily, and the fact that it was an honest return, there was a brief moment where I turned into Chicken Little. Sky's falling, sky's falling. But instead of running forth with that cry, I got on the telephone and called Chuck. Talked to him for a few minutes about the weather and how the Dodgers were doing. You never want to call anybody for help and let them know that that's why you're calling, you see. In fact, it's sometimes even good to tell them, I know you can't help me. That shows how wise you are in calling them, knowing they can't help you. But no, I told him, I said, hey, Chuck, you know, an odd thing happened this morning. I got a notice that they're going to audit my income tax. Did that ever happen to you? He said, yes, it did, Donald. Didn't bother me a bit. I said, what did you do, Chuck? And he said, I just sent Elsa down to talk to them. So on the next occasion when I spoke at the Laguna Beach Ladies Club meeting on Wednesday night, their big meeting down there, where Chuck and Elsa were always seated up in a certain spot in the front row there, I told his acolytes I had finally found the secret to Chuck's serenity. Let go and let Elsa. They were a wonderful couple, both gone now. When I wanted spiritual inspiration, I talked to Chuck. When I wanted some practical advice, I talked to Elsa. I also mentioned Clancy. Now, I knew Clancy when he hit LA with no teeth. I mean, here was a flim-flam man of the worst order. A hustler. My God, he would talk people into the damnedest things. They had to vote him out of the 6300 Club. He was such a mooch. And I took his inventory and realized he couldn't make it. He'd gone too far. I mean, the book says there are some who had just gone too far. But then I went out on one of my 2-year sabbaticals. And when I came back, he was the secretary of a little group called the Pacific Group. And people were trying to touch the hem of his garment. I thought, by God, I better never drink again. Lord knows what sort of heresy is going to break loose if that happens. Now, Clancy hasn't changed at all. He is still the most convincing speaker I have ever heard. He can sell people and make you believe everything he says, and he saves people that nobody else can possibly reach. Now, you can come down on him for his admitted miscarriages, the things he does that are wrong, or you can attack the Pacific Group, his book Walled by the Sea, or whatever you want to call it. But he helps more damn people who nobody else can reach because of that salesmanship quality that he had when he got here. He hasn't changed that much. When I speak at the Pacific Group, I am able to tell the sycophants in the room what he was like when he got here. And they're shocked. It's like attacking Jesus in the Baptist church. Because he and I have, I think, been good friends for many years now. But he helps people that just beyond my comprehension. I'm the one he talks about, I think. When I used to get somebody who had problems, not only couldn't I answer them, I couldn't even understand what the hell they were talking about. I would take them out to Santa Monica late at night, go up on Clancy's doorbell, ring the door, on his porch, ring the doorbell, leave the guy there and run. And Clancy would take them in and work with them day and night for 2 or 3 years until they saw through them. And then I could take them back and make a gentleman out of them. But of course, the Pacific Group wasn't what it became. In those days, it was a regular group, although it had the makings of what it later became. But he and I used to attend each other's meetings. I controlled Hollywood at that time. I had a secretary of a meeting there and appointed all the secretaries of the other meetings. It's called democratic centralism in the Communist Party. It is the way to run a railroad, those elections. But I can only do it for a couple of years, and then I couldn't hack it anymore. And so I held an election, and I shamed Clancy into having one, because he had never had one. He was the hereditary secretary of the Pacific Group. He was going to pass it on to his children. And he pleaded with me. He said, but Don, if I do that, they'll throw the rascals in. Not if you run the election correctly. But the highlight of both of our meetings, I had this one meeting in Hollywood, and he had the one in West Side. At the end of each meeting, the secretary's announcements were the highlight of the meeting, because he and I would then, at our respective meetings, get up and explain what those poor, sincere, but inarticulate people had been trying to say. And one night at my meeting, which also was a point-to-finger 5-minute meeting, Clancy had been called on. And he had gotten up and he told about how he had had a hard day working at the office, talking on the phone to potential customers, talking to AA members who called him. How he had had to go meet with this newcomer. Now later he was going to have to go out and hear an inventory. He said, I won't get to bed till after midnight. But when I finally do, a little voice will say to me, Clancy, you are worth saving. So when I gave my announcements, I said, I've had a tough day laboring before a hot bench, and then I had to come down and set up this meeting, and later afterwards I got to break it down, and when I get all of it done, and I got to drive clear out to the beach and stand outside this cuckoo bird's window and say, Clancy, you are worth saving. And having spoken about how these other people traits were used for good, I should throw my own in there. I have always been a complete loner. Other people in AA say, I'm a loner, but I notice they have friends and they like to go to conventions and they do all of the things that involve other people. But I was a real loner. All my life, my earliest memories of school were teachers saying, why aren't you out there playing with the other children? Why are you sitting here reading a book? I felt guilty because I was a loner. Ideas are more important to me than people. I don't get emotionally involved. And that very character defect later turned out to be of, I hope, some use. You probably, or some of you, again, who've heard my various bits know what happened to me on the program. When I was new and trying to get work, I had learned that our stories are often the source of innocent merriment. But what I hadn't learned was that the non-alcoholic will fail to see the humor in them. And so I remember interviewing at this large law office, and I thought, I want him to love me, not for my own sake. I had outgrown the need for human approval. No, I wanted him to love me to the glory of your name, and so that he'd give me a job. And so I told him little lighthearted AA-type stories, about how I got drunk and threw my mother-in-law down the steps. And being intoxicated, fell after and got a hernia. Not a big story, but a little icebreaker. And he didn't giggle a gig, didn't titter a tit. He just kind of stared. And I thought, I guess I'm being too subtle. So I told him about the time I was in 4-point restraint and vomited straight up. That got a reaction. And so after once more into the breach for some time, I said, look, I'm not asking you to recommend me. He said, recommend you? Recommend you? I wouldn't offer your name for consideration. No attorney in the history of this nation has ever done the things that you've done, or had happen to him the things that have happened to you. I suggest you forget the law. Go into the countryside, try to regain your health and simple labor. When we send men into a courtroom, they represent strength in the face of adversity, determination, grit, never say die. Send you? Never. I'm telling you, I was crushed. I was absolutely destroyed. If I could have slithered like a serpent across the floor under the door down to the nearest bar to drown the shame of that bottomless bottle like I always did, I'd have done it. Except I thought, if I do, that fellow will be right. He'll be right. I can't take it. And I'm not going to give that fellow the satisfaction. Went on and drank coffee at him. About 10 years later, that guy took the check protector, one of the secretaries, ran to Europe, Paris, disgraced his law firm, disgraced the legal profession, disgraced the city of Pasadena as well as his family, one of the most beautiful pyrotechnic displays of misconduct I ever saw, and he did it cold sober. On the other hand, about 20 years later, the governor of our state called me and told me he was going to appoint me to the appellate bench. As far as I know, the highest judicial office ever held by a sober alcoholic, at least in the state of California. For the next 15 years, you know what happened? When I entered a courtroom, if members of that firm were there, they stood up, and they remained standing until I told them they could be seated. All power to the powerless. And yet I hadn't changed all that much. Ideas were still more important to me than people. I still didn't get emotionally involved in resolving problems. I would glib, used to write well. Maybe I did some good for the legal profession and the state during my time in office. But it was my character traits that did it, because I hadn't changed all that much. Well, I mean, I changed, obviously. I was staying sober, which was the greatest change that can come into the life of an alcoholic. And I'd learned to laugh at myself, which, by the way, should you not learn that, you're going to miss the greatest joke in your generation, I'll tell you. Nothing is more ludicrous than me when I stand in front of the juggernaut of society waving my fist, thou shalt not pass, crash, boom, you know. But I hadn't actually changed all that damn much. The same traits that used to be my plague were now a great help to me and hopefully to some members of society. I'm going to close that door. I can't quite make out what they're saying back there. It sounds rather interesting. I want to pick up on it, and I can't quite, I didn't get the punchline. And AA not only brought that about, but it became involved in my work as such. AA, we have our own language, our own litany, our own secret codes. We don't know they're secret. We don't even know they're unique. But when you go into a grocery store and you happen to bump into the person ahead of you, you step back and say, oh, no, first things first. And the other one says, oh, no, easy does it. Oh, you're a friend of Bill. And these things began to work into my decisions sometimes. For example, in law, we say a complaint sounds in a certain field, sounds in contract, sounds in equities, sounds in tort. Now, I don't know why we say that. We're just saying that he's trying to state his cause of action in that given field of law. Maybe Blackstone said it 300 years ago, and somebody said, hey, that's a grabber. And so we've been saying it ever since. But I wrote a decision one time that said, no point would be served in analyzing appellate's complaint in detail. Suffice it to say it sounds in self-pity and resentment, but states no cause of action known to the law. Wrote another one that said, in law, as in life, half measures avail us nothing. And my colleagues say, where do you get those expressions? Oh, they just come to me, pop, pop, pop. And even on the bench, it would come up. I remember we had an attorney arguing, his client had killed a few people, and he was trying to urge us not to be too harsh in judging the man, even though the man hadn't been entirely honest when he had been arrested. And I heard myself saying, or at least somebody in my seat was saying, do not worry, counselor. We all understand that murder often leads to lying. Fortunately, I didn't follow it up and say, if he keeps it up, he'll be drinking and in real trouble, I'll tell you. And so as I say, but I haven't changed that much. I sat on our California Supreme Court. 7 of us in our black robes, 7 deadly serious outwardly, 6 apparently deadly serious inwardly. One of them sitting there thinking, oh God, if they could see me at the Llano Club tonight. But I took myself lightly and my job seriously, and I hope I did a fairly good job. I've had a good life, wonderful life. I don't mean to imply that it was free of all turmoil, disappointment or otherwise. A little over a quarter century ago, my wife left, and I thought, no good could come of this but break my heart in two. I was left bringing up my youngest son, who was then about 13. I'd like to say that as a result of my program, he and I were able to communicate one-to-one. But any person who says they talk to their pubescent children one-to-one will lie about many things. Of course you don't talk to an adolescent like that. Adolescence is a form of insanity. And they have no command of the language. Verbal speech is beyond them. You take out like and you know, and they'd be mute. They go into their room and put primordial grunts that have been put to music and amplify it very loud, but beyond that, nothing. Of course I didn't communicate with him. He lived in the front of the house, I lived in the rear. The only time I used to see him, I'd throw money in the hall and wait. But after a year or two of our bouncing around together, the lady who should be addressing you came into the household, a place where angels would have feared to tread, and got us both through our adolescence. She's quite young to me, as is everybody. But she's quite young, and yet she seems to like me, which is very good. She doesn't object to old age creeping on her at night, which is better. And we have done all sorts of wonderful things together. See, this is the thing. I'm an old man now, obviously. And though I regret the things I have done that hurt other people, I think I regret even more the things that I didn't do, the things that I could have done when I was of an age to do them, the years I totally wasted in drunken stupor, sitting in a bar stool looking at the mirror, doing nothing. I could have had as much fun paying somebody $20 to hit me with a board for all I did. Now, sober, I have done, I think, about everything I ever fantasized about doing, and I've done it. Somebody once said to me, why is your program more enthusiastic, more ebullient than mine? You have a better program than I do, I guess, huh? And I said, no, I don't think it's the program. I just do more things. As our leader said, AA is to get out and live. I took 3 hours of flight training and soloed. Rented a plane that weekend, flew to San Francisco. It didn't have any instruments. I didn't know anything about navigation. I just flew over Highway 101. Ha ha, work the steps, work the steps. Got through the male menopause racing motorcycles with Steve McQueen out in the desert. The only copy of the big book they used to see around Barstow on Sunday. I couldn't have done things like that when I was drinking. Took up scuba diving. I know you're supposed to study. You get into a pool with snorkels and masks and practice. I don't have time for that. I mean, I'm one of those hum a couple of bars, I'll pick it up type. I just put all the crap on, went out to Catalina Island, jumped off the boat, swam around down in Seaweed City. It was so beautiful down there, I stayed down until I ran out of air. Yeah, I give my higher power a real test. This is the nice thing about our program. We have the greatest scapegoat known to man, our higher power. I haven't made a mistake of any sort in decades. Not the faintest error, no deviation from the path of valor or rectitude, no faux pas have I been guilty of. On the other hand, God has seen fit to do through me some of the dumbest, most petty, egomaniacal, self-centered, crazy things you could imagine. But if it gives him pleasure to make me look like a horse's ass, who are you to criticize? Take it up with him. I've taken the third step. The other people say that whatever they say from the podium is just their own opinion. That's not true with me. I've taken the third step. What I tell you is the word of God. And you better listen up. The only problem is he keeps changing his message all the time, and I make me look like a fool for having misinterpreted it in my last talk. But no, we've done those things. We've hiked in the Alps, went down the length of the Grand Canyon in the raft. And that was an adventure. We decided we'd try it, rafting, maybe go out for a day or so. But moderation is a rumor to me. We found you could go down the whole length of the Grand Canyon if you would sign up for 10 days. And so we did. And we got to Flagstaff where they were putting the rafts together, an orientation thing, and a crowd of people. And we heard one guy saying, and a lot of them were smoking, and we had to quit smoking, so a lot of them were smoking, and then one guy says, he isn't taking any beer. Can I take 2 cases? I thought, what have we done? We're going to be in the bottom of a hole for over a week with people who are smoking and drinking. Maybe we should cut our losses and get the hell out of here. But we came this far, let's give it a whirl. And so we went down, and on our raft were 9 Jehovah's Witnesses from Texas and 2 Mormons. None of them smoked, none of them drank. We had the greatest time you can imagine. So we've had a wonderful time, as well as a sad time, including my wife's back. She's had back surgery. But these things happen not because we're alcoholic, but because we're human. Our lady there said she sometimes feels lonely, but that's because she's alcoholic. Non-alcoholics never feel lonely? I've never known an alcoholic to suffer from a single emotion that non-alcoholics don't suffer from. We're exactly as they are once we stop drinking, with one exception. All of the things that I've described, whether it's racing motorcycles, running marathons, which I had to do after I got sober, after I quit smoking, I had to do something for my lungs, I got into running. All of these things are things that produce endorphins. I didn't know this until I watched a PBS show about the brain, and they were saying that they showed a guy driving fast. They weren't talking about alcoholics, they're talking about the brain, how you can touch various parts of it now they've discovered with a little electric probes, and it'll produce every emotion that we know of by just the touching of the brain in the various places. And they showed this guy driving fast down the street, and they said, he drives like this because he's an alcoholic, and alcoholics do not produce endorphins like other people. Endorphins, by the way, is that endogenous morphine that the body produces whenever you put it under stress. When you run too far, your body begins to hurt, you get the runner's high. You can do something that's frightening, runner's high will kick in. That's why people go on roller coasters. It scares the hell out of them. They get off. Want to go again, Ruth? And I realized then that all of the things that I was doing, free fall parachute jumping, motorcycle racing, flying airplanes, scuba diving, running marathons, all those things were things that produced endorphins. They weren't just a matter of living. I was substituting for something that had been taken away from me. Booze, or the other better living through chemistry, in and of itself doesn't do anything for you, but it has the ability to plug into those parts in your brain, those synapses, that produce those emotions. And so we, between drunks, like the book says, and Clancy likes to emphasize, between drunks we are nervous, restless, irritable, discontented. I agree with that, but it's no solution for me. It doesn't help me. Why the hell are we like that? That's what I want to know. We're not doing it on purpose. It's because apparently, by the way, this may not be correct, I know nothing about medicine, but it's a good theory in that between drunks, we were like people, like engines without a lubricating oil. The things that ordinary people get that help them to deal with these stresses and strains of daily life, we didn't have. And so we're just kind of grinding on. And when we do take a drink or a fix, boom! That's why we get that tremendous jolt that they don't get, because we never had anything like that. Maybe it's just a hypothesis, but it really helps explain things to me. Made it much easier for me to grasp the idea of why I can't drink, but why I can do things to substitute for what booze used to do. AA isn't a program of elimination as much as it is of substitution. If you didn't substitute, nature abhorring a vacuum, booze would flow back in again. I've talked too long. I got to get off here. You know, I wish there was something I could say to help people. I think the thing I would like to get across, if anything was possible, is the idea that I touched on earlier. You have to get out and live, and you have to do that right now. Don't postpone it. Right now. Some philosopher once said, the unexamined life is not worth living, to which the reply should be, the unlived life isn't worth examining. You have to do it right now. If you want to do anything to improve society, strike a blow for justice, you must do it now. In the tomb, nobody raises their hand for righteousness' sake. If you want to do something tender, loving, gentle, lewd, lurid, you got to do that now, too. A poet said, the grave, it is a fine and private place, but none, I think, do there embrace. Another poet said, the bird of time has but a little way to flutter, and the bird is on the wing. My bird doesn't have very much longer to fly. I don't want to miss a beat of those wings. I hope everyone here, particularly the young ones, will stick around and we can fly together. Thank you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller start calibration, out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.